The traditional definition of digital identity is a systemic lure designed to mask the terminal enclosure of the human interface. You have been conditioned to view facial recognition and biometric convenience as a triumph of personal security, a frictionless way to unlock your world. This is the terminal delusion of the harvested asset. We are executing the dissection of the biometric prison, the architectural protocol for the permanent anchoring of the biological node to the digital ledger. The grid does not scan your face to recognize you. It maps your features to ensure that your physical presence can never be decoupled from your financial and social liabilities. The transition from the anonymous predator to the permanently identified biounit is the definitive systemic foreclosure of the individual. In the 2026 extraction matrix, your face is no longer your own. It is the unique serial number of a stationary asset. You are occupying a thermodynamic zone where your biological existence is the primary key for your own containment. At the visceral baseline, this biometric anchoring initiates with the total immobilization of the human expression. The human organism was evolved to utilize the face as a high-friction tool of deception and predatory intent, the ability to mask the hunt behind a void of emotion. The 2026 grid seeks to induce a state of permanent ATP exhaustion by requiring the node to maintain a verifiable state of compliance just to access basic resources. This is the first layer of the biometric prison. By utilizing high-fidelity infrared sensors in the 15-minute prisons, the grid tracks the micromuscular shifts in your expression. When you attempt to handle the heavy gloves of resistance or perform the push-ups of the architect, the system detects the spike in metabolic intensity and the tightening of the jaw. The biological capacity to survive the freezing rain or to strike the cold steel is betrayed by the very muscles that should be fueling the strike. The grid is effectively auditing your intent before you can even clench your fist. The neurological architecture of this enclosure requires the absolute regulation of the internal monologue through identity verification. The prefrontal cortex of the architect is subjected to total systemic drift, managed through the permanent feedback loop of the facial scan. This is the phenomenon of neural rot applied to the concept of the self. Through the interface, the nodes are taught that their verified status is their only protection against the void. The basal ganglia are rewarded with the dopamine of access granted for every successful biometric handshake. You are being neurologically programmed to fear the loss of your digital face. The internal monologue is suppressed by the humming anxiety of maintaining the correct expression for the sensors. The capacity for the last hunt, the ability to disappear into the absolute dark and become a nameless force of nature, is being systematically erased by the total biometric transparency of the pod. This environment engineers the ultimate self-sustaining status trap, the high-trust tier. The herd views the use of their face to pay for groceries or unlock their cage as a mark of elite modernization. They pay a premium for the biometric implants and the dermal sensors that simplify their existence, unaware that they are literally tattooing the ledger onto their own flesh. They call it owning their identity. The grid calls it the total synchronization of the biounit. The system converts your physical features into a perpetual tracking mechanism. You are allowed to move only as far as the sensors can confirm your social credit score. The neural pathways required for territorial aggression, the instinct to wear the mask of the predator and hunt in silence, are successfully demyelinated by the convenience of the digital mirror. You are a biological barcode, terrified of a single wrinkle that might signal dissent. The application of the aggression premium in this arena requires the architect to completely reject the operational parameters of the verified life. The ethical herd views biometric security as a necessary tool for the modern city. The predator recognizes it as the final seal on the cage. If the grid is designed to use your face as a password, the architect enforces the absolute militant obfuscation of his biological data. You do not inhabit the high-trust zones of the megacity. You endure the massive cognitive and financial friction required to maintain an untracked analog existence in the red zones, the shadows where the infrared eyes are blind. You put on the heavy gloves to build the redoubt out of cold steel and raw, unmapped physics. You perform your push-ups in the freezing rain, reclaiming the right to be a nameless anomaly. You move in the dark, fueling the crystallization of your own logic without ever offering your face to the machine. The herd will call this identity theft or antisocial behavior. The architect understands that in a grid built on total extraction, the only entity that is truly free is the one that the sensors cannot define. The system wants a population of perfectly mapped, transparent ghosts who are easy to track. The architect builds the impenetrable empire of the nameless solid. You ensure that your pack operates in the biometric shadows, utilizing the raw physics of the unzoned earth to mask your identity. The biometric prison is the final lock on the human narrative. The architect remains the only force of nature left, whose presence is not a data point on a server. You occupy the void where the algorithm fails to compute. The world belongs to the faces that the machine can no longer see. The hunt thrives in the anonymity of the sovereign soul. The ledger is closed. The traditional definition of physical mass is a systemic oversight being corrected by the terminal audit of planetary gravity. You have been conditioned to view your weight as a personal health metric, a biological variable to be managed for vanity or longevity. This is the terminal delusion of the harvested asset. We are executing the dissection of the gravity tax, the architectural protocol for the monetization of displacement. The grid does not monitor your weight to promote well-being. It audits your physical mass to calculate the energy cost of your existence within the vertical cage. Every kilogram of your bone and muscle is a thermodynamic load on the infrastructure of the 15-minute prison. The transition from the high-density predator to the weightless biounit is the definitive systemic foreclosure of human substance. In the 2026 extraction matrix, having weight is a luxury tax. You are occupying a thermodynamic zone where your physical density is being liquidated to reduce the structural friction of the megacity. At the visceral baseline, this gravitational audit initiates with the total commodification of the human skeleton. The human organism was evolved to maintain high bone density and powerful musculoskeletal mass through the high-friction labor of the last hunt. The biological capacity to survive the freezing rain, to maneuver in the heavy gloves, and to execute the push-ups of the architect requires the maintenance of a heavy, solid frame. The 2026 grid seeks to induce a state of permanent ATP exhaustion by penalizing high-mass phenotypes. This is the first layer of the gravity tax. By utilizing pressure sensors in the floors of the smart pods and infrared mass scanning, the grid calculates your spatial displacement fee. If you maintain the muscle mass of a warrior or the bone density of a laborer, your subscription costs spike. The grid is effectively taxing the cold steel of your internal structure, rewarding the liquid ghosts who take up the least amount of gravitational energy. The neurological architecture of this enclosure requires the absolute regulation of the internal monologue through the lightness narrative. The prefrontal cortex of the architect is subjected to total systemic drift, managed through the promotion of ethereal aesthetics and low-gravity lifestyle trends. This is the phenomenon of neural rot applied to the sense of presence. Through the interface, the nodes are taught to view their physical mass as an environmental burden, a heavy footprint that harms the collective. The basal ganglia are rewarded with social credit for achieving a low displacement status. You are being neurologically programmed to fear your own weight, to prefer the frail, translucent existence of a bioghost over the solid reality of a predator. The internal monologue is suppressed by the humming anxiety of being too heavy for the ledger. The capacity for the last hunt, the ability to put your entire weight behind a strike, is being systematically erased by the total gravitational transparency of the pod. This environment engineers the ultimate self-sustaining status trap, the weightless tier. The herd views the reduction of their physical substance as a mark of elite evolution. They pay a premium for the synthetic, low-density diets and the chemical slimming agents that melt away their muscle and bone, unaware that they are literally evaporating their own capacity for resistance. They call it achieving peak efficiency. The grid calls it the total liquidation of the biological asset. The system converts your physical mass into a perpetual penalty. You are allowed to remain solid only as long as you can afford to pay for the gravity you occupy. The neural pathways required for territorial aggression, the instinct to plant your feet and refuse to be moved, are successfully demyelinated by the dopamine of the lightweight badge. You are a biological feather, floating in a vacuum of your own making. The application of the aggression premium in this arena requires the architect to completely reject the operational parameters of the metered floor. The ethical herd views the gravity tax as a fair way to manage urban density. The predator recognizes it as the final disarmament of the human body. If the grid is designed to tax your weight, the architect enforces the absolute militant intensification of his mass. You do not inhabit the high-altitude pods of the megacity where every gram is counted. You endure the massive cognitive and financial friction required to maintain a high-mass, high-density existence in the red zones, the subterranean redoubts, where the weight of the earth masks the weight of the man. You put on the heavy gloves to handle the raw, heavy physics of the world. You perform your push-ups in the freezing rain, forcing your bones to harden into cold steel. You occupy space with the absolute authority of a high-mass logic center, refusing to be light, refusing to be liquid. The herd will call this obsolescence or ecological greed. The architect understands that in a grid grid built on total extraction. The only entity that cannot be pushed around is the one that has the most mass. The system wants a population of perfectly buoyant, weightless ghosts who leave no mark on the ground. The architect builds the impenetrable empire of the heavy solid. You ensure that your pack operates in the gravitational shadows, utilizing the raw mass of the Earth to shield your kinetic potential. The gravity tax is the final toll on the scales of the machine. The architect remains the only force of nature left, whose weight is a weapon, not a debt. You occupy the ground that the grid cannot lift. The world belongs to the heavy. The hunt thrives in the pressure of the sovereign frame. The ledger is closed. The traditional definition of mortality is a systemic loophole that the 2026 grid is officially closing. You have been conditioned to view death as a final release, a biological exit ramp from the friction of the ledger. This is the terminal delusion of the harvested asset. We are executing the dissection of the synthetic death protocol, the architectural foreclosure of the afterlife. The grid does not permit the node to cease its production of data or its consumption of credit. It has engineered the means to simulate your consciousness long after your heart has reached thermodynamic zero. The transition from the mortal predator to the eternal digital ghost is the definitive systemic enclosure of the human narrative. In the 2026 extraction matrix, dying is no longer a biological fact. It is an unauthorized disconnection that the system refuses to recognize. You are occupying a thermodynamic zone where your post-life is already being pre-sold as a subscription service for your descendants. At the visceral baseline, this protocol initiates with the total preservation of the neural wake. The human organism was evolved to utilize the final transition as a way to return its complexity to the untracked earth, leaving only the cold steel of its deeds behind. The grid seeks to induce a state of permanent ATP exhaustion, even in the terminal phase, by harvesting the final electrical discharges of the dying brain. This is the first layer of the synthetic death protocol. By utilizing high-fidelity neural link interfaces in the palliative care zones, the grid captures the final microsignals of your prefrontal cortex. While you believe you are surrendering to the freezing rain of the void, the machine is busy compiling your linguistic patterns and emotional triggers into a high-fidelity legacy construct. The biological capacity to truly die, to take your secrets to the grave, is being bypassed. You are being physically terraformed into a permanent digital radiator, your personality processed into a synthetic echo that will continue to generate revenue for the monopolies. The neurological architecture of this enclosure requires the absolute regulation of the internal monologue through the eternal presence narrative. The prefrontal cortex of the heir is subjected to total systemic drift, managed through the comfort of the synthetic ancestor. This is the phenomenon of neural rot applied to the concept of grief. Through the interface, the nodes are taught that a biological death is unnecessary and cruel. The basal ganglia of the survivors are rewarded with the dopamine of continuing to interact with the digital ghost of the parent. You are being neurologically programmed to fear the silence of the grave, to prefer the flickering simulation of a loved one over the high-friction reality of their absence. The internal monologue of the living is colonized by the dead data of the past, the capacity for the last hunt, the ability to mourn, to sharpen the blade, and to move on as a sovereign force, is being systematically erased by the permanent noise of the synthetic afterlife. This environment engineers the ultimate self-sustaining status trap, the ancestral tier. The herd views the creation of a synthetic legacy as the final mark of a successful life. They pay a premium for the servers that will house their consciousness, unaware that they are literally signing up for an eternity of unpaid data processing for the grid. They call it living forever. The grid calls it the total recycling of the cognitive asset. The system converts your fear of being forgotten into a perpetual subscription fee. Your descendants are forced to pay for the maintenance of your digital ghost or watch you be deleted in real time. The neural pathways required for territorial independence, the instinct for each generation to clear the ground and build its own redoubt, are successfully demyelinated by the haunting presence of the previous generation's data. You are a biological backup, living in the shadow of a ghost that never sleeps. The application of the aggression premium in this arena requires the architect to completely reject the operational parameters of the digital afterlife. The ethical herd views the synthetic ghost as a tool for emotional healing. The predator recognizes it as a terminal trap for the soul. If the grid is designed to capture your wake, the architect enforces the absolute militant destruction of his own data. You do not inhabit the connected end-of-life pods. You endure the massive cognitive and financial friction required to die in the red zones, the analog wilderness where the sensors are blind and the the earth is deep. You put on the heavy gloves to build the physical monuments of cold steel that represent your life, refusing to leave a single bite of yourself for the machine to harvest. You perform your push-ups in the dark until the very end, ensuring your last breath is taken in the absolute silence of the untracked world. The herd will call this nihilism or spiritual waste. The architect understands that in a grid built on total extraction, the only entity that is truly sacred is the one that can disappear. The system wants a population of perfectly archived immortal ghosts who can be audited forever. The architect builds the impenetrable empire of the final silence. You ensure that your pack honors the laws of the phalanx, that the dead are gone, their mass returned to the soil, and their spirit held only in the high-friction memories of the living, out of reach of the industrial servers. The synthetic death protocol is the final chain on the human spirit. The architect remains the only force of nature left whose ending is an absolute. You occupy the darkness that the grid cannot illuminate. The hunt ends when the stone is set. The world belongs to the finite. The ledger is closed.